Hi there, good evening. Welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show from Westwood One Radio. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Online, you'll find us at jimbohannonshow.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Jimbo Talks. Well, 6 months ago, just about no one knew what COVID-19 was, and now we have surpassed a morbid milestone in the country. The coronavirus has now killed more than 50,000 people here, and as most states remain under some social distancing orders, lawmakers are working to bring some sort of relief to struggling Americans and to their businesses. And so we'll take a look at just where we are and where we are going and the best ways of getting there with our guest, Mark Harrison. He's lead anchor and managing editor at the Labor Network, online at their name, thelabornetwork.com. Mark, good evening.
Good evening, Jim. Thanks so much for having us.
Glad to have you with us tonight. And for those who are not aware, tell us just briefly about the Labor Network.
We started about 4 years ago by seeing a need of there being a void about the kind of news we talk about: labor rights, worker rights, union news. The top three major television networks do not have a dedicated labor anchor. The top 25 newspapers in our country do not have a labor reporter. And the major cable networks also do not have a labor reporter. We believe that this is one of the most important aspects of a person's life. We spend, after all, most of our time working for a living. And we're trying to shed a lot of light on worker issues.
Fair enough, and a worthwhile goal, again, that it is, at thelabornetwork.com. Mark Harrison, our guest, lead anchor and managing editor. So let's take a look at where we are. Wall Street, after some terrible drops, has gotten kind of iffy, I suppose you could say. And in terms of where we're heading economically, I've heard everything from a sharp recession from which we should rebound fairly quickly because the economy is basically sound, all the way to it could rival 1929. What do you see?
Well, I think, Jim, maybe we're somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. We saw 44.4 million added to the rolls this week of the unemployed, 26 million total. I think next Thursday we're going to be somewhere north of 30 million, and I do think it's possible we could approach 40 million before things begin to reverse itself. The problem is I think things will come back quickly, but only partially. We could find ourselves hovering around an 8, 9, 10% unemployment rate for quite some time because we're losing small businesses and we're losing the jobs that go with them, and maybe some other businesses along the way as well.
Yeah, that's one thing that there are a lot of businesses out there, I suspect, who they were marginal. Okay, the market was going great guns and the economy was generally looking pretty good. Unemployment was way down. And these were businesses that were not tearing up the world, but they were hanging in there and they were buoyed, if you will, by the good economic conditions around them. Well, not now. And I don't care how many SBA loans you have available, as necessary as they may be, a lot of those businesses I just described are not coming back, and those jobs are not coming back.
That's exactly right. And, there's some controversy on now. Do we open or do we not open? And I'm not a medical expert, but I can tell you one thing. If we open and it's a false opening and we have to shut down again and go through this again, we're going to see far more of those businesses that you just pointed out taking the same making that same decision. We can no longer function. We can no longer exist. And there's a very interesting thing coming down the line on the other side of this, and that is we've been reporting at the Labor Network that in the next 12 years, 30% of our jobs could cease to exist because of artificial intelligence. How many of these businesses are going to sort of take a look at that on the recovery side of the corona issue?
Yeah. Serious questions that need to be asked. And, of course, we're in uncharted territories here. We've not dealt with this virus before. It's very contagious, sometimes asymptomatic. Even for those with symptoms, they can often go a week and a half being contagious without even knowing that they are. And of course, unless everybody got tested, and there's nowhere near 328 million tests available in this country. So I've likened this to you're going down a mountain road and the brakes go out on your car. Now you've got to find out a way to wreck the car slightly so that nobody dies. You don't go flying off the edge of a ravine, and hopefully you wreck it only enough that nobody's hurt and the car can be started again. And you've never done this before, and there's no rule book, and that's not an easy thing to do.
Exactly. We are in absolute uncharted territory. It's breathtaking, really, when you think about it. And there's a lot of people want to talk about 1929 and the Depression, but there's so many different things now. It's really almost hard to compare. You have two people, for the most part, in families in the workplace versus one back then. There's a lot of banking safety nets that weren't in place then. One of the things that concerns me a lot is the medical situation. You know, it's estimated right now that 12 to 35 million people are going to lose their job-related health insurance. And that's on top of 27 million that had already lost their health insurance before we got there. So we could be looking at 40 to 60 million people potentially uninsured in very short order. It's very disturbing.
It certainly is, and again, all coming to roost at the same time. 1-866-50-JIMBO, our number. 1-866-505-4626. You have, I believe, a Facebook page. Is that right?
Yeah, Facebook. If every one of your listeners went to Facebook and liked us and followed us, we'd be on the map and really helping people help us to tell the story to people. And
that's what, at Labor Network?
It's just go to Facebook and then the Labor Network.
I was just going to say, at Labor Network sounds like a Twitter.
We've got one of those too.
Very good. All right. Anyway, 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626 as we talk with the lead anchor and managing editor at the Labor Network, Mark Harrison, and we're trying to get some handle on this wild roller coaster of a ride that is our economy. And let's go to Kenneth in Janesville, Wisconsin, a listener to WCLO Radio. By the way, Kenneth, I'll be joining Tim Bremmel on your talk show on Monday, so stay tuned for that. Absolutely. What's on your mind?
Jim, I'm thinking about the times and right after we got discharged from NUM, and I worked all night and went to school during the day and listened to you. Hubert Humphrey was running for president, and he talked, he said we did not have a labor policy in this country, and that was the last time we ever talked about it in a presidential election in 1967.
Well, okay, by a labor policy, I mean, I'm not sure. We obviously have various policies relating to labor, which you may or may not like, but we do have policies as such.
I'm using the wrong word, not policy.
You mean, you're not talking about industrial policy, are you?
No.
Okay.
Well, it's related, like they have in Europe. And I can't think of the word right now.
Well, they, of course, have what are known as labor parties in much of Europe, which are political parties that are pretty much aligned with labor unions. But again, I'd love to toss this to our guest, Mark Harrison, but I'm not quite sure what you're getting at, Kenneth.
I'm trying to think of the word that Hubert Humphrey used, and I can't remember.
Well, let me okay, quickly,
Kenneth, yeah. This is Mark.
Yes, Mark, go ahead.
The pain that we're feeling right now is being felt by it's being felt most by our least affluent populations. And I'm not sure what you're talking about with labor either, but I can say this to you. Income inequality was at its lowest in this country in 1958. And at that time, labor union membership was 33%. Now, it's about 11%, maybe 7% for the private sector. An interesting thing happens when you have 33% of your workforce in a labor union, and that is that the business next door has to either pay their employees the same amount of income and the same benefits, or they risk losing those employees to the union shop. Everybody rises when we're at 33% labor union participation. And we don't have that. And over the last 50 years, we've lost that tremendously. For 40 years now, income has stagnated while the cost of housing, the cost of education, the cost of health care has gone up. College costs in the U.S. are among the highest in the developed world. The list goes on and on. And this is something we have to look at very seriously as we come out of the other side of this.
All right. Anyway, Kenneth, thanks for your listenership. And again, catch me Monday morning on your talk show with Tim Brimmel on WCLO as we talk to Don in Albany, Oregon. Hi, Don.
Good evening, gentlemen. Good evening. I was just going to ask, aren't jobs already being automated out of existence?
Well, some, not all.
Yeah, this is true. This is true.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we're seeing some factories. The most obvious one we see is at the grocery store. A lot of us go to the grocery store, and there's this little robot there named Marty, and he the first thing he does is look for spills in the aisles and reports them back. But that little robot is also going to start deciding when to stock shelves and when not to stock shelves. We're seeing AI in every aspect of our life. That's artificial intelligence, and it is growing rapidly. In China, they're using robots much more in factories than we are here. So while we do see it, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg.
You know, something that I think that might occur to some of these people, presumably people who run businesses are in the business of making money, and there are more than a few of us who would pay a little extra, which would be pennies on the dollar, maybe fractions of a penny on the dollar, for people to actually provide customer service. I'll say that slowly. Customer service for those out there who've never heard of such a thing. And again, the idea that you can do something in a cheaper and more impersonal way, it does not automatically say that you should or that there isn't a market for, again, the fraction of a penny. They don't pay these people fortunes that it would cost to have actual live human beings, for example, answering telephones and providing service and getting rid of the voicemail hell and other things in which you call up a number and you want to ask about A, and they promptly tell you about B, C, D, E, and F, which you don't care anything about. Again, I have to assume that these people are out there to make money, but they could make a lot more if they backed off of this.
Well, you would think so, wouldn't you?
No, I'm sure they could. They don't know it, but I know they could.
Yeah, I travel a lot, and I go to order room service anymore in a hotel, and I'm told the room service doesn't exist anymore. And I'm told the reason for that is because most people don't want it, and yet everyone I talk to actually would like to have it. But they say, no, you can come downstairs and pick something out for yourself from the little mini mart. I agree with you, and we've lost that. And I'm afraid we were losing so much human-to-human contact and human service. I agree with you completely.
Yeah, I mean, again,
bring that back.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds to me the product of some wet behind the ears punk, shiny new MBA who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. Here's David in Creston, Iowa. Good evening, David.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, for taking my call and also your guest. You know, we always hear about people that are sweating this thing, and you know, the economy is going to hell in a handbasket. But I wonder how many people are. There may be some very, very rich people in the world, and you know, that we don't even know about. It could give a flip less one way or the other how the economy goes because they're set for life, and if everybody died, they'd just be happy as a lark. So. I haven't heard of any of that theory.
Well, I'm not quite sure what point you're getting at. I mean, I'm sure there are people who are independently wealthy and do fine on their own. If you run a business, let's say, and you're worth a lot of money, and it depends on customers, then you clearly don't want your customers to all die.
Well, if you got enough money, you don't care whether they die.
Well, it depends. I mean, for some people, acquiring money is just a way of keeping score on how successful you are. But again, do you have anything for our guest in specifics about this, other than the fact that some people are wealthy, which we would both say, I guess, okay, they are. Well, okay, nothing, I guess, in particular. Why don't we just make a question here? The inequality of wealth in the country, does that bother you, Mark Harrison?
Oh, yeah. That's really one of the main reasons we began the labor network. And we are also seeing inequality pain felt here much more than we would have. This shines a light on it. You know, crises like this serve to expose problems, but they don't necessarily solve it. The way to solve it is through leadership, societal leadership, political leadership, corporate leadership, union leadership. Everyone deserves a place to call home. Everyone deserves to not go hungry. Worker rights are human rights. There's all kinds of platitudes. We're seeing people who were once referred to as unskilled labor, sort of in a tongue-in-cheek way, are now being referred to as essential workers. And they are also the folks out on the front lines. They are the ones that are dying. When fast food workers making minimum wage are forced to go on strike in California to ask for masks, gloves, soap, paid sick leave in case they get sick, there's something wrong with the system. Why should they have to ask for that?
Obviously, they shouldn't have to, and just as obviously, it's not to anybody's benefit. Even if you're a heartless SOB, it's not good business for anybody if workers die. And we have a call from Sharon in Crane, Missouri. Hello, Sharon.
Hello, Jim, and hello to your guest. I have worked as a so-called unskilled worker. I have also worked as a skilled worker. I have worked under unions, and I have also worked for a company that was the first to break a union contract in the state of Wisconsin. So I have seen this from all sides. One thing I have never understood is unions, not so much now because they have shrunk, but unions used to have more money almost than God. And they collected dues. I know because I had to pay those dues. If people who are working need health care, then why didn't the unions get together with their members and form associations or contract to a different company and provide health care for their union members?
Many do.
Going off to
Many do. The union to which I belong, SAG-AFTRA, they do just that. As a matter of fact, I don't know precisely how many, but some do.
Yeah, most.
In fact, you may recall the big battle about Medicare for all back when there was a Democratic presidential race, and one reason why so many people in Nevada voted for Joe Biden against Bernie Sanders was because the argument sold that Sanders was going to take away their hard-fought and rather nice health care package, and they didn't like it. So, I mean, and again, that's casino workers, and I'm a broadcaster. So some unions do, Mark Harrison.
Yeah, absolutely. I also belong to a union, and our union provides it. But everything is negotiated, Sharon. Everything comes up for contract, and it's a negotiation. And the workers that belong to that union have to tell union leadership that they believe they want a health care system that works for them. And they have to press that issue. And I don't know the ins and outs of how your negotiations went, but it's normal. You know, one thing we don't have in this country is we're the only first world country without job-based mandatory health care. The only one. And that's something we really need to look at.
Anyway, Sharon, but just wanted to make that point that some do, but if you had more, please continue.
Like I said, I have belonged to two different unions, okay?
Right.
And our union did nothing. Both unions did nothing except take our dues, and there was a lot of money that was spent on political pressure, which was fine. I understood why they were doing that. But we were also told how we had to vote. And we were also told basically that we had to follow the party line. And if we objected, then there was hell to pay. I'll just be frank with you. There was hell to pay.
Well, but first of all, they don't go into the voting booth with you, so they have no idea how you vote, as more than a few unions found out when some of the states that went for Donald Trump in 2016. And also, there's a name for unions that do nothing for their members. It's called former unions. They die off. So, I mean, there are some like that, but I mean, others respond to their members and they tend to survive. I wouldn't say thrive. No unions are thriving these days because of things like outsourcing, but one size does not fit all, Sharon.
Well, one more point, and then I'm going to get off the phone. I know I've taken up too much time. When it was like the car manufacturers, when the car manufacturers and the unions really got into head-to-head negotiations, there were unions members and unions that were willing to see those plants all closed down rather than preserve those jobs. And as a result, we lost a lot of jobs, and they went to Mexico and they went to other places. There has got to be some kind of recognition on both sides that you're working for the good of everybody and not just one side. And I don't see that happening in politics. I don't see it happening in unions. I don't see it happening anywhere, unfortunately. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sharon. Of course, Mark, certainly there is the view, and it's not an entirely incorrect view, that we're talking of a zero-sum game, particularly in labor management disputes. And full disclosure, I've been involved in more than a few. I've been quite active in this union, and I've seen these things up close. And the general viewpoint, and I would say this is one thing on which labor negotiators and management negotiators tend to agree, and that is that the pie is more or less finite. It can grow a little or shrink a little, but pretty much the same size. So a bigger slice for me means a smaller slice for you. Your thoughts?
Yeah, corporations argue that their sole responsibility is to their shareholders. Workers are mostly left out of the process unless they have a union. Capitalism is good. Capitalism unchecked can be tragic, as we're seeing right now. Workers need to work with one voice. Unions bring a countervailing voice to capitalism that is unchecked. Collective bargaining means speaking with one voice, and it means getting involved. And I wonder if Sharon had ever attended a union meeting or ever considered running for office in her union.
There have been reports about how some rather large companies have been getting these small business paycheck guarantees. And I looked up how the Small Business Administration defines small business. And here are the definitions. There are several of them. For manufacturing and mining industries, 500 employees. Wholesale trade, 100 employees. For retail and service, $6 million of business. Construction, $28.5 million. Trade contractors, $12 million. Agricultural, $750,000. Obviously, anything that could be loosely called mom and pop does not fit into any of those definitions.
Exactly. And that's where we're seeing a lot of hurt. I've talked to a few folks who own very small businesses. Just last night, I had the opportunity to talk to a woman whose husband worked as a contractor for the state of Connecticut. He had a business of himself, and he had one employee that worked with him. And they were just told there would be no more business for them until the summer of 2021. He has yet been able to get through to unemployment, and he has yet to be able to try to get a loan to help tide his other worker over.
Yeah, I'm somehow not surprised, I suppose. Brad in Clarion County, Pennsylvania joins us. Hello, Brad.
How you doing?
We're fine, thank you.
Good.
Hi, Brad.
I was a union member. I belonged to the United Steelworkers Union for a total of 35 years, 33 for one and 2 for the other. And they've taken care of me, and it was a strong union. The lady, previous caller there, I don't believe they had a strong union the way she talked. But we had a strong union, and they took care of us, and I'm still being taken care of by a pension I get every month.
Well, again, absolutely. Unions are not one size fit all. Some are stronger than others. Some industries are more easily organized than others. If you have a particular activity that is easily outsourced, for example, then clearly you're largely undercut. Mark?
Yeah, agreed. In fact, outsourcing is one of the great problems that's leading to income inequality. A lot of times we see a business that looks around and it says we're paying this much an hour for workers that either work for the company, they may be union members, they may not be union members. But what we need to do is eliminate those jobs and put out for bid a contract company to come in, and usually cleaning, you will see this with the cleaning services, and it goes to the lowest bidder. And these people come in and they do the work that used to be done by corporate people with corporate benefits and corporate wages and everything that went along with that. And now they're done by people that are involved with third-party organizations, and they're making minimum wage. They have no benefits, very often no medical care, and it's a problem. But the unions can keep that from happening if at all possible.
Regarding minimum wage laws, there are certain jobs where, quite frankly, as economic entities, those jobs are not worth, let's say, $15 an hour. And there are more than a few industries, I dare say, where there are automation techniques which have been developed, which at current minimum wage laws, really, they're not economical. You jack up minimum wage to $15 an hour or whatever, and you're going to see a lot of those processes that have been sitting on the shelf because they weren't economic suddenly being used because they're very economical. And you're going to wind up with more than a few people. Instead of, let's say, 10 people who are making $7.50 an hour, you wind up with 3 people who are making $15 an hour.
Well, and that's true. And as these jobs get replaced, we do have to have a safety net to get people trained for the new jobs. We need to have a safety net of a stipend so that they can afford to eat and pay their rent. We need to have training provided for them, and we need to help them be elevated. And most importantly, we have to provide medical care for them. So these minimum wage jobs, you say they're going away. We talk about a universal basic income. Minimum wage can be that, but we need to catch these people who lose these jobs. They need to be trained.
I guess it was Michael Yang was the Democratic presidential contender guest on this program who pushed the idea of a universal minimum wage or universal wage, I should say. Your thoughts about that in an era in which more and more things were being automated, even beginning law students now. A lot of law firms used to use brand new law school graduates to do research, and now there are IBM programs that do that. So even people who've got 19 years of formal education are getting automated. So your thoughts about whether or not such a wage, and let's face it, if you cannot earn a living by working, and if we're reaching that point, you can't just take the people who can't work out and shoot them. So you have to do something with them.
Yeah, I think we have to do first is define what exactly universal basic income is. Does that go to everyone from the person cleaning the office to the hedge fund manager? And if not, how does it change? And are we now beginning to talk about unemployment, permanent unemployment insurance? The cost of UBI for the entire nation would be double what it currently costs for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid combined. So it's a massive undertaking. I frankly don't see Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell coming to agreement on this anytime soon. So while we're talking about UBI, we have to begin to define exactly what it's going to be. And I go back to let's give people a UBI-type stipend to get them trained and educated. Let's give them medical care. This is what they do in some of the European countries. When their jobs get replaced, when we lose jobs from people, let's get them trained in new technologies.
Here is Steve in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Hello, Steve.
Good evening, Jimbo, and
Mark.
Esteemed guest, Mark. Thank you. I listen to your program. All evening and every night. My question's on the H-1B visa program. I'm a technology worker, and I have concerns. More so now with the coronavirus, because a lot of these companies are going to start looking at cutting workers, especially technology contract workers like myself. I work for one of the big aviation companies, the Big B, as you know. And
that would be Boeing, I assume, right?
Absolutely.
Okay,
that's correct.
Go ahead.
I'm a contractor, and one of the issues, and I've been working as a contractor, either as a subchapter S Corp or W-2 through one of these technical recruiting companies. They bring in these H-1B visas in droves at $65,000 a year one year, then it's $135,000. Congress passes, those kinds of laws that get signed by the president. And my main concern is that I can't compete on a global scale because I'm not going over to India to work in their country, but it seems like everybody's coming here and they depress wages. And when you try to obtain work through one of these middlemen technical recruiters, you're almost shut out of the marketplace because the first thing they ask you is, how much do you want? And they really know what the price is. It's almost like, depressed wages for software engineering STEM workers, like in the $40 an hour range.
Right. All right.
And,
go ahead.
You can't make a living. You can't make a living that way. You have to pay errors and omissions insurance, your own health care insurance. You might as well just be a painter, at that wage after you pay two sides of the taxes. I'd like to know why the president doesn't close that program down. We have enough STEM workers, and in fact, it's most likely a self-fulfilling prophecy when the big companies say there's not enough STEM workers, because parents are going to push their kids into the STEM programs if there's no...
I hear what Steve is saying. Cheap labor is always what businesses want to have. Boeing moved the 787 production plant to South Carolina because South Carolina was a right-to-work state. And the truth is that the average employee in South Carolina makes about $18 an hour, while the average employee out in Seattle makes about $25 an hour. So Boeing is getting what it wanted out of that. It's amazing how immigration is sometimes good and sometimes bad, how it's manipulated to fit the narrative. And what you're looking at, a person who's worked very hard in an industry, who's been a taxpayer and a hardworking citizen of this country, you're looking at cheap labor coming in and possibly replacing what you do. The alternatives, if the administration and if the current climate in Washington will not allow a change to that, you guys might want to think about organizing.
There's a thought, Steve. 1-866-50-JIMBO. We go to Maggie in Alexandria, Virginia. Hi, Maggie.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. May I say first that when I was 18, I was a proud member of the UAW working on a rotary assembly line. We were making wire harnesses.
That's the United Auto Workers, for those who don't know their initials. Go ahead.
We were working on an assembly line making wire harnesses for Ford cars. I was there for a year or a little more. We had to move away, so I had to leave finally. But the problem is not labor unions, and the problem is not American workers. The problem is this political, laissez-faire, regressive atmosphere that set in after about 1981, where this wholesale outsourcing, free trading, whatever that means, union busting set in, and American workers started being seen as a liability. This is still continuing. It has to swing around. It swings around here in this country, back and forth, the atmosphere. Just one example. I could talk for a month about heartless SOBs, so to speak, as you mentioned earlier.
Well, let's face it. I mean, the Andrew Carnegies and the Henry Fords of the world would have cheerfully outsourced all kinds of work, but it simply wasn't technically feasible. So you're looking not at a new attitude, you're looking at new capabilities, Mark Harrison.
Yeah, the American economy has doubled in size in the last 40 years, but most of that went to a small portion at the top. If you were born in 1940, 90% of those that earned an income passed what their parents had earned by the age of 30. If you were born in 1980, you only had a 50% chance of doing that. So we have seen exactly what you described, Maggie, and that is a continuing regressiveness, a continuing march toward income inequality. And it needs to turn around, and we need to do that in the voting booth, and we need to do that with one collective voice. All of us workers need to come together and forget what they're telling us about immigration, forget what they're telling us about race.
Except, of course, for the part about people who break into the country illegally. We don't need to forget that. But if people come here illegally, that's a different issue entirely. So anyway,
I agree, Jim.
Yeah. Anyway, time has elapsed. Stay on the line. We'll speak off air. Mark Harrison from thelabornetwork.com, managing editor and lead anchor. And I'm Jim Bohannon. We come to you weeknights, of course, right here at Westwood One.